The downfall of Dilma Roussef. Brazil's leader has been kicked out of office. So where does the country go from here? And can the new president, Michel Temer, bring together a divided nation? Also on today's program, political deadlock in Spain as the latest attempt to form a government fails. Could the country be heading for its third election in a year? And in Picture This, the Great Elephant Census. The biggest ever project to count elephants in Africa shows a worrying decline in numbers. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. Brazil's Dilma Roussef was defiant to the end, but she's been dealt a crushing defeat. For 10 months, she's been fighting moves to impeach her in a process that's exposed deep divisions in Brazilian politics and society. But finally, on Wednesday, her fate was sealed. 61 out of 81 senators voted to permanently remove her from office, ending 13 years in power for the left-wing Workers' Party. Roussef's opponents say Brazil can now look to the future, and her successor, Michel Temer, vowed to unite a bitterly divided country. But he's facing a mammoth task, with a string of corruption scandals still hanging over the political and business elite, and the country facing a deep economic crisis. Today's newsmaker is Dilma Roussef, as we ask what her impeachment means for Brazil and where the country goes from here.
Brazil's political fires are still burning after the impeachment of Dilma Roussef.
Nós não vamos desistir, lutaremos a todo momento, não vai ter arrego, vamos lutar a todo momento.
Não sei se sonho quebrado, mas a democracia pra gente, nosso voto não é nada.
The Brazilian Senate voted 61-20 to remove Rousseff. Following the vote, protesters in multiple cities called for the removal of her replacement as president, Michel Temer. Rousseff has said she was targeted for impeachment because she allowed a wide-ranging corruption investigation to go ahead. It implicated almost all of Brazil's major political parties, as well as a number of high-profile politicians, including Michel Temer. Ultimately, she was found guilty of manipulating government funds ahead of her re-election in 2014. Something that has passed precedent, but is technically illegal. Her removal marks a final chapter in the downfall of a politician who at one point had the support of 85% of the population.
Acabam de derrubar a primeira mulher eleita presidenta do Brasil, sem que haja qualquer justificativa constitucional para este impeachment. O golpe vai atingir indistintamente qualquer organização política progressista e democrática.
The political tremors have reverberated across a continent, one which has a history of violent struggle between the right and left ends of the political spectrum. Brazil's left-leaning neighbors issued a prickly response. Ecuador, Bolivia, and Venezuela have recalled their ambassadors. But there is popular support for Rousseff's removal, part of a general air of discontent with the political establishment, much of which is implicated in corruption scandals. Brazil is currently experiencing its worst economic recession in more than 3 decades. Michel Temer has promised to introduce austerity measures aimed at restoring Brazil's credit rating.
O caminho que temos pela frente é desafiador. Conforta-nos, entretanto, saber que o pior já passou. Indicadores da economia sinalizam o resgate da confiança no país.
But Temer's critics have warned that he plans to cut many of the popular social programs introduced by Rousseff's leftist Workers' Party. Whether the law was exploited to subvert democracy to impeach Rousseff is a matter of contention. But the move has deepened political divisions in Brazil, while at the same time responding to popular demand for accountability.
Promover o bem geral do povo brasileiro,
something unlikely to fade, with a new president now taking the reins of Latin America's biggest economy. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now is Silio Boccanera, who's the London correspondent for Brazil's Globo News. Thanks for joining us, sir. 61 out of 81 senators backed her removal. That's a massive majority. Why was that such a massive landslide?
It has been that way, actually, throughout the crisis. She lost by a similar ratio in the lower house of the Senate. She has lost throughout the process because there is a tremendous pressure to try to sort out the situation. And as much as her supporters claim that this is the equivalent of a coup, you have to consider that people from all political persuasions, specialists of all political persuasions, were heard and they had a chance to debate this case for the past 8 months. And still, they voted her out.
Yeah. The major question is he really the man to replace her, Temer? Unelected, not many Brazilians knew about him beforehand, had the corruption spotlight on him as well, replacing a woman who had never lost an election before. Is he really the man? Wasn't there someone better?
If you put anybody there better, I'm sure there could be somebody better. It would be illegal because according to the Constitution, you have a president and a vice president. And the Constitution says if you remove the president for one reason or another, if the president resigns, if the president dies, or if the president is impeached, who takes over? The vice president. He happened to be the vice president. He is very well known in Brazil. People just don't like him. He's very unpopular. But he was the official occupant of the position as deputy of Dilma Roussef. So the moment she's removed, he takes over.
Is this the end of an era or just the beginning of what could be a massive political fight ahead?
Well, there will be quite a political fight ahead. He has 2 years to go. He's very unpopular, as I just said. He is facing an enormous economic crisis. He's facing a political crisis, facing a moral crisis. The biggest oil company in the country is just devastated by corruption involving lots of politicians. And the investigation and the follow-up to those situations will go on for the next 2 years or even longer than that. But I think that when I mentioned 2 years, because then we'll have elections, national elections already scheduled. And perhaps the situation will be more hopeful. People will find more legitimacy in a new government that is voted in.
Yeah, Dilma has said defiantly, they think they've defeated us, but they're wrong. And then she said, I know we will all fight. Is she that confident that she has enough of the street, enough of the masses to back her if she decides to take Temer on?
Well, let's look at the facts. The opinion polls show that she doesn't reach 10% approval in the country today. Not when she was elected, way back when, but after everything that came out. She doesn't have 10% approval. She does have a very militant party. Traditionally, the Workers' Party in Brazil has been very militant. If anything, from the left, the criticism of the Workers' Party from the left is that it diverted away from its main essence as a Workers' Party, a representative of the people, that it moved towards the elite rather than defend the rights of the people. But it does have a tradition of fighting, a tradition of street protests, and perhaps that's where it's going to go now, to its roots in defending workers and defending those with less privileges in society as an opposition party.
If Michel Temer stabilizes the economy within the next, say, 12 to 18 months, is that going to be enough to placate Dilma's fan base?
It's hard to predict that. Obviously, when you look at the situation now, when you put everything together, the country is in a recession. It is going down. Unemployment is going up. Cost of living is going up. Everything contributes to people being very unsatisfied with what's going on. If he manages all that you described, which is quite a big task, you may soothe part of the public opinion and even part of the opposition. But I don't think they would be necessarily satisfied totally with that. And as I said, they probably would be exercising the function that gave them prestige and respect, which is to act in opposition and representing the lower segments of society.
Silio Boccanera, unfortunately we are out of time, but it's been good to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Coming up on the Newsmakers, Spain's politicians fail yet again to form a government. Why is it proving so hard to break the political deadlock? And in Picture This, 18 countries, 3 years and 10,000 hours in the air. We look at the results of an unprecedented project to count elephants in Africa. After several years in the doldrums following the 2008 financial crisis, Spain's economy finally seems to be picking up. It's on course to grow almost 3% this year, making it one of the Eurozone's top performers. But this has happened in spite of, not because of, the government. In fact, Spain hasn't had a government for almost 9 months. Sandra Gutman explains.
Last December, expectations were high. The arrival of new parties from the far left and center-right were going to revive Spanish elections, challenge the austerity policies of old, and put fresh faces in government. But instead of renewal, the result has led to paralysis. In the last 8 months, Spain has called 2 general elections, exposing deep rifts among the country's political parties who seem unable to shape a coalition. The ruling Popular Party, led by Mariano Rajoy, has repeatedly won the most votes, but not enough to rule. And allegations of party fraud and corruption have made it tough for the PP to find friends. This week, it finally struck a deal with the liberal Ciudadanos group and a small party from the Canary Islands, but it's still 6 seats short of a majority.
Presuman hoy ustedes de un acuerdo con Ciudadanos que incluye medidas contra la corrupción es una burla indecente. Se los diré sencillamente, no les creo. Es mentira que ustedes vayan a combatir la corrupción porque ustedes son la corrupción.
The leftists have vowed to block any coalition led by the acting Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy, but he's refusing to step aside.
Mi propuesta es la única posibilidad real de que España pueda disfrutar de un gobierno moderado que no sea una aventura de radicalismo, ineficacia e incertidumbre.
If Rajoy fails to win another vote of confidence, elections may be called for the 3rd time in a year. Political deadlocks have left countries without governments before. The most famous example is Belgium. Between 2010 and 2011, Flemish and Francophone parties couldn't establish a coalition, granting Belgium a world record of being without a government for 589 days. But the stalemate didn't put a freeze on many aspects of daily life. And the same is true in Spain, where the caretaker government is clocking up more than 280 days. In fact, Spain's economy has grown in that time, and unemployment is falling month after month. What the acting cabinet can't do is approve next year's budget or spend on big construction projects, which could soon start to hurt Spain's economy. Allegations of fraud and corruption within Spain's ruling party have fueled discontent with the political elite, a sentiment that gave rise to anti-establishment movements like the Indignados and fringe parties like Podemos and Ciudadanos. But even they are being blamed for the power struggles in Madrid. Public frustration, though, may come to a head this December if Spaniards are forced to go back to the polls on Christmas Day of all days. Sandra Gutman, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now is Francisco de Borja Lacheras, who's head of the European Council of Foreign Relations in Madrid, and Camino Mortera-Martinez, a research fellow at the Center for European Reform in Brussels. Thank you, both of you, for joining us. Francisco, let me start with you. So, no government since October 15th. Acting Prime Minister Rajoy wants to form the government, but Spanish lawmakers won't let him. Tell me one big reason why.
Well, because there's no trust in the prime minister, and the numbers don't match. So they didn't match after the first round of elections in December, and although in the second elections the Conservative Party of Mariano Rajoy improved its results, they still fell short of a number of votes to win a majority according to our constitution. And neither the socialists nor the Podemos want to even abstain and let the caretaker government become a proper parliamentary government. Their cleavages are very deep, and we need to bear in mind that Spain is in the midst of a full restructure of the party system. Mm-hmm. So this political instability will take a little bit of time to stabilize now.
Camino, Francisco says that the cleavages are deep. Can we say that there are two clear camps here? So you have the acting prime minister and his PP party, and the centrist Ciudadanos on the one end, and on the other end you have the socialists and Podemos and others. Is that the sort of clear cleavage?
I'm not sure about that, though, because you've got Ciudadanos who, as we know, actually made a pact with the Socialist Party in the last elections when Pedro Sánchez, the leader of the Socialists, tried to form a government, and now they are trying to have an agreement, or they have an agreement with PP. So they see themselves as some sort of a central party that can lean towards either right or left, depending on the needs of the country. With the Socialists and Podemos, as it's also not really clear whether they are on the same boats. Pablo Iglesias, Podemos leader, did not support Sánchez initiative last elections. However, he's trying to offer now the Socialist Party to have some sort of a coalition to try to get into the government. So I think the cleavages are a bit, they're right. Deep indeed, but they're a bit different of what we're used to.
Yeah, Camino, so it's sort of clear up until now, all these months down the line, that the parties would rather have no government than coalitions with people that they don't like. But then the main question then that follows that is it hurting the country while they bicker over the formation of a government? Is it hurting the country, Camino?
I think it's hurting public confidence, as we were hearing before. I'm not that sure whether it's hurting the economy or whether it's actually hurting a very much needed democratic cleanse process that we should be going through in Spain. So what I mean is that we're seeing that citizens are getting fed up, citizens are getting tired of not having a government. At the same time, the economy is doing okay, unemployment is falling indeed, and daily life of Spaniards have not really been that much affected. However, I think the risk is that citizens indeed end up being really, really tired of the situation and going back to the status quo of a year ago. So we would have been in a process of a year and some months of trying to do something about the crisis and about the situation, and end up in the same results that we would have had a year and some months ago.
Francisco, taking that a step further, if it's not hurting the economy, then can we say that the system is robust enough to ride the instability created without a central government? And hey, maybe the country doesn't need a central government as much as it thought it did.
No, I think we live in the semblance of a fake economic stability, because as my colleague said, indeed there are some good macroeconomic indicators. The country is growing, unemployment is going down. But if you look at the numbers, at the nitty-gritty issues, there are still very serious structural flaws. Our economy is booming, tourism is booming, but we need to reform the labor market, and there are some pending reforms that need a government. So in that regard, I don't think this is sustainable. And also, yes, we need a government to take forward some of these reforms and be back on the international agenda, because at this point, Spain is unable to implement some of the agreements reached with the allies, say on NATO or on the EU. So I think it's the semblance of a fake stability, whereby you have political bickering and some economic growth, which has been happening for some time, by the way, but this is not sustainable, no.
Yeah, interesting that you made that point. Camino, there will be a possible third general election in a year on Christmas Day. A prospect, El País, the main newspaper in Spain, called, quote, an unmitigated disaster. Are they exaggerating a little bit here?
I'm surprised by the Spanish debate. I live in Brussels, so I'm not in Spain. So I'm surprised sometimes when the Spaniards kind of get really worked up about the situation and say that this hasn't happened in Europe, or this is like such an exceptional situation, and that third elections will indeed be a disaster. Even though I understand the level of frustration and the level of getting fed up with these blockades and these kind of things, I'm not that sure that it would be such a big disaster and it would be such an unprecedented situation. We've got Belgium, as we heard before, which had no government for many months. And I think, as I was saying before, I think that the country is going through a cathartic process of democratic cleanse, and it needs some sort of it's going to be a painful process. So if third elections need to happen so that we actually move forward and do something about the situation in the country, and indeed we are able to do these structural reforms Francisco was mentioning, constitutional reforms, tackling the problems with nationalists and all these sort of things, then so be it. I think the problem and the disaster would be if we go to third elections and we actually go back to the same situation that we had before.
Francisco, a cathartic process, not a disaster. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, like my colleague said, there are lights and shadows. It's true that Spain is undergoing a democratic political moment of party restructuring, even of potential for rejuvenating our constitutional system. But the tragedy is that our politicians bickering could squander that very opportunity. So far, it could be cathartic. It's not been cathartic. And now the question is whether it could be a disaster. It shouldn't be a disaster, but we're somewhere in between. And interestingly, not even our leaders know what will the outcome be.
Yeah. Camino, as Sandra Gutman's report just preceding this discussion explained, Belgium, where you are, went almost 600 days without an elected government. Any possibility that Spain might beat that record?
I'm not sure about that. I think the level of tolerance of Spanish citizens towards the politicians is much lower than the level of tolerance of Belgium in general. Also because we don't have the same problems Belgium has. Mainly the problem that this country went through was related to the different national minorities and how to make this the whole regional state, so to speak, work. In Spain, things are different. So we do have a very importantly regional state as well. We have important regional forces, but the problem at the moment has very little to do with the construction of the state, but much more of how, indeed, as Francisco was saying, how the politicians are bickering and not being able to agree with one another. So I think the level of frustration of Spaniards would reach its top much earlier than Belgium did.
Okay, Francisco de Borja and Camino Mortera-Martinez. I've received a little bit of an education on Spanish politics. It's been great to talk to you. Thank you very much. In today's Picture This, nearly a third of Africa's savanna elephants have been wiped out over the last 7 years. That is the worrying discovery from the biggest ever project to count elephants across the continent. Let's take a look. Today's newsmaker was Dilma Roussef, now Brazil's former president. A Senate vote on Wednesday brought an end to her presidency, but it remains to be seen whether the political crisis triggered by her impeachment process has also come to an end. The new president, Michel Temer, takes over a divided nation facing an economic crisis. Our guest was veteran Brazilian journalist who said that Temer is deeply unpopular and he's taken over by default because he was the vice president and the legal process determined that he should succeed Rousseff. It could take another 2 years until the next election for the country to fully move on. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.